Hi everyone, welcome to Privacy Now. I'm Mike Fibus. Today we're going to talk about private web browsing, which is understandably a very high priority for many of us these days. And here to talk about it with us is Brendan Eich. Brendan is an industry pioneer who's now president and CEO of Brave. Brave is widely known as the fastest browser in this very fast growing category. And before founding Brave, Brendan co-founded Mozilla and was a very early contributor at Netscape. While at Netscape, in fact, he did what he's arguably best known for. He created JavaScript. That's the code behind like 95% of what you see on the internet today. So Brendan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So privacy really became a thing, top of mind for folks last year with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But you started Brave, what, 5-6 years ago?
6 years ago.
Okay. So arguably ahead of the curve before privacy was a thing. What prompted you to start Brave? What were you thinking?
My own experience, both as a user of the web and web browsers and a pioneer from JavaScript through Mozilla, I was bothered by not really ads so much as tracking, the feeling that you're being watched. People become aware of this when an ad retargets you, sometimes tries to sell you the same luggage you just bought for your holiday, and you've already got it. And it's bugging you not only as you browse around the web on a PC, sometimes it seems to follow you from device to device, which is pretty creepy. So that and other worse aspects of tracking or targeting bothered me, and I thought something should be done about this that's constructive for the web, not just block the tracking, which I think is every user's right, but something that helps users support their favorite creators, publishers, YouTubers, so on.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. There's, on the one hand, blocking, which of course is a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it can feel invasive and creepy. On the other hand, it supports what we want to see. So how are you hoping to manage that?
So I think the first thing to do is to sort of chlorinate the pool. There's definitely an ecosystem there, like my children's fish tank when it's not tended well, but it tends to get taken over by parasites who take a lot of the money out through fees that are involved in the tracking and the targeting and the ad serving and the sort of confirmation of ads. So the publisher who's at the end of that payment chain gets whatever crumbs are left in the pie tin. And it turns out all the middlemen are taking the big slices. So we clean that out by blocking tracking and targeting, and that has obvious benefits for the user. You don't see the annoying ads that follow you. You don't see many ads at all. You have a faster experience. You use less of your data plan on mobile devices. You use less of your battery because the radio isn't running to load those tracking scripts. So it's a good thing for the user, but it also cuts out the fee takers. And then we try to reconnect the user directly to the creator so that the user can pay the creator directly. And that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah, and I saw just on July 11th, you announced that you're taking that system over to Android as well. So it's not just the PC now.
That's right. It's been on the laptop and desktop, and now it's on Android, and I guess iOS is the final frontier. And this system is a system for users rewarding their creators and getting rewards themselves. So you could think of it almost like a point system. It uses a cryptocurrency token, a cryptographic token, but that's all kind of down in the plumbing. What really people see is you get some tokens and you give them back by default. You can steer them. You can use them to buy things or subscribe. You can pin them all to one or two favorite creators on YouTube if you like.
Oh, that's a good one. And so I've been using Brave. It's definitely fast, and I definitely do appreciate it. Is it difficult to get folks to download yet another browser? I mean, when folks get a new PC, they may stick with Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer, or they may download Chrome, Firefox. How do you get to that next step and get them to download?
Yes, I've done this several times now. So the way you do it is you get the lead users, the users who are more technical, but not necessarily programmers, the users who are more conscious of privacy. And they tell their friends and family, you'll love this because it is faster. It does save battery life. It does reduce your data costs. It does declutter your screen and make your pages load much faster. And once the user adopts Brave, they can't really go back to Chrome because it's like walking in quicksand.
It's a good point. It is. So that does seem to sort of, a multi-year approach of building momentum. And how's that going so far?
Pretty well. I think we're up to 2.3 million daily active users. We're emphasizing the daily part because we want people to stick with us as their main browser. And there are many little things you have to get right to do that. Like we support all the Chrome extensions on the desktop now. That wasn't true last year, but now that it's true, people are realizing they can just switch and not look back.
Yeah, it's ironic to me that that Chromium, the open source browser hardware or structure, is what's behind Brave, and not just Brave. I mean, others are adopting it as well, but it's in a sense Google is helping us get away from Google.
Yes, I mean, open source has a long lineage. I've worked in it since the Mozilla project, and I contributed even before then to projects you wouldn't have heard of. But it turns out the browser engines are almost all now open source, and really the Western ones are all open source, and there's no way to walk that back. So what we do with the Chromium open source that Google mainly controls is we take out all the Google accounts and the Google telemetry and the Google tracking. The sad thing is Chrome has become part of the ad business and the search business, and it had to. I understand why for business reasons this happened, but people didn't realize this even when the privacy policy started talking about it in 2016. If you log into the browser in the upper right corner of Chrome with your Google account, then your navigation can be used for ad targeting. That was a clause in this big unified privacy policy not everyone read. But over time, people became aware, and then last fall, Google said, well, you know what, people aren't logging in enough. So if you use Gmail in a tab, or if you just use Google Docs in a tab, well, we'll log you into the browser just to help you out. And of course, that enables the tracking for ad targeting.
Right. It's been building on itself over and over again. Have you noticed a difference in adoption since this whole thing has really exploded over the past year?
We've grown every month of our existence. We had faster growth depending on how we approached the market. When we made it possible to use your favorite Chrome extensions in Brave, that obviously helped. So desktop's been growing very well this year. That's one example.
Okay. Now, the token setup, it seems to me, you're really going to need a critical mass there to make this, advertising online 2.0, I'll call it. Do you envision licensing it to others as well, or how do you get there from here?
The token doesn't need licensing, but the way to approach this is to prove it in Brave and then make an open source, what's called a software development kit, or think of it as just open source code others can use that
Right.
can be fraud-proofed, because fraud is always an issue when there's substantial economic activity, but that can be embedded in other browsers, podcast apps, video players. Even a lot of games have an ad economy that they subsist on. So all those apps could use our approach, and we're going to prove it in Brave first and then take it to those other apps.
Right. Blockchain, of course, is the underpinnings of the currency. Do you see that sort of distributed ledger framework helping with the fight fraud as well?
Over time, it's hard to use a blockchain to prove that there's a honest human instead of a fraud actor or a robot on the other side of a network. So blockchain can't cure all ills, but it's part of the puzzle. We approach the platform we're building using all the tools in our belt, including the neglected side that is your device, where you have to trust your browser already. If your browser is open source and you can trust it, then it can do things to prove you're a human. You can get incentives for those proofs. You can provide what are called zero-knowledge proofs that everyone can trust without knowing who you are. So they don't have to know that I'm somebody particular, just have to know that I've proved that I'm a real human, and I can give a mathematical proof of that. That is powerful, and that is underutilized today. A lot of the free services may know who you are because they signed you up and they want to target you. But they don't sell your individual identity to the advertisers. They sell you as part of a segment or a bucket that's about to buy a car, for instance, or maybe is within a few months of buying a car. That's a valuable cohort to belong to. So everything that matters is aggregated, and it isn't important that you be de-anonymized. Unfortunately, because of the way the technology evolved, including JavaScript, which is used for good and ill, you are identified. Your identity leaks all over the place. When you go to a page without protection like Brave offers, your latitude and longitude, sort of keywords that identify you as to interests and demographic brackets and maybe even sensitive data about health conditions get broadcast out every time an ad is placed.
Yeah, and that's a scary proposition. There are a couple of things embedded in there. One is, on open source and creating an SDK. Does the fact that you're then sort of Chromium based help in that way? I assume it makes it easier for Google and Microsoft and all the others that are using Chromium to build their browsers.
It does. I think that if we go broader to podcast apps, it doesn't matter so much, but open source allows anyone to audit the code. Now there's obviously millions of lines of code, so will everyone audit it? No, but experts will, skeptics will, activist groups who have expert programmers can look at it closely, and that's helpful. It's only, again, one part of the puzzle. You have to have transparency as to your source code. You have to do things that, again, use cryptography to prove that the code you're running on your phone came from that particular open source. That's an interesting problem that people are taking on. You can do other things to secure your code against being tampered with. It can be fooled by inputs like a fake human or a robot, a fraud actor could do, but the code itself has integrity. It hasn't been altered. And then you have to look at the inputs coming from the device sensors and say, does that look like a human? Does that walk like a human? Now, the way this is being done in many places, people talk about China doing gait analysis, how you walk, your walking gait.
Right.
But people are worried about face analysis. That can be really creepy and Big Brother. Our approach is to do that analysis locally on your device. And again, keep your identity, including these sort of fingerprints and motions you make that identify you, keep that all as closely guarded as possible and mint a proof that doesn't disclose your identity but does prove you are real. And that's how we're approaching this problem.
Okay. Along those lines, I had a question about one of the features, which is sync. To be able to see on my smartphone that, or continue a search or hit
bookmarks.
Bookmarks. Yeah. Now, I feel like I want to say double-edged sword a lot here in this interview, but that does seem like a double-edged sword to me as well. You obviously have to know more about me. What am I giving up with sync there?
With our sync, we don't see any of your bookmarks or any other data that we're adding to sync. We have to add more than bookmarks, which is where we are right now. But all of it gets encrypted on your device using a secret key only you know. That's an approach that's quite private, because we can't decrypt that data, so we can't look at your history or your bookmarks. We can't infer anything from it. We don't want to. We don't want the burden. We prefer it can't be evil to the old Google slogan. I think they retired of don't be evil. That hasn't aged well. We want mathematics, cryptography, and just isolation, the fact that we don't see that data in the clear, to protect you from us as well as other threats. And there are other outfits doing this. Apple has this approach, I think, in a large extent. Mozilla also uses a sync system that has this property. So this is not unique to us, but sync does not require you to log into Google and put your history up into their cloud in a way that they can look at. That's something they chose to do for business reasons.
Right. Don't do evil's aged well. Just the definition of evil arguably hasn't. But
yeah, I guess.
And speaking of them, they are adding their own privacy controls. Microsoft is adding privacy controls. It's do you think as we look to the future, do you think it will be harder to get folks to download Brave? And if they're on the currency, do you care?
I thought a lot about this when I founded Brave, because obviously I've done browsers before that took over market share or even restarted the browser market with Firefox. But you could run out of steam, especially if your economics as a business depend on a search deal from Google, for instance, which is what happened to a lot of the browsers. Apple makes a lot of money off their search deal for Safari. for instance. Mozilla is back with Google as their search partner. They have other partners too, but Google's the big one. And the US is the big market. So I wanted something that could be independent of that dependency, that could make money off of a clean model that shares revenue with the user through the token. So I think the token is important, and I think if we prove the model, everybody but Google will beat a path through our door. Now, you're quite right that all the big surveillance companies are spraying on privacy perfume to cover up their sort of necessary business interest and their naked, self-interest in rating or privacy. And the thing that I realized before I founded Brave is that they have a real problem walking back from their need to track. They would take a materially adverse event in their stock price. They would do something if they blocked all tracking. Imagine Google just blocked everything like we do. They would suddenly be down in the market and their stock would fall, their revenues would fall, and they might recover by doing things like we're doing, by innovating with privacy by default. But it would take them time, and they would take a hit, and there would be class action suits for shareholders. Suppose that they, instead of blocking everybody's tracking, they blocked everybody but their own. Well, then they'd be even worse antitrust trouble and anti-competition trouble in Europe. I don't think they would dare to do it. But there's been whispers and rumors of this for a while. They did something a couple of years ago that was supposed to be an ad blocker, and it turned out to be a cosmetic filter in Chrome that just got rid of ads nobody likes anyway, and it was part of a better ads coalition. They then were more recently talking about blocking tracking, and I think everyone's doing that. Microsoft with the new Edge is going to block this, rolling in tracking protection in stages. But nobody's turned it up to 11 like we have it. And if Google did, again, they'd be in trouble. Either they would have to cheat on their own behalf, or they would just take a huge hit in their revenue.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine them wanting to do that.
Or being able to as a public company, yeah.
On July 11th, in fact, the same day that you moved into the Android platform from the PC, Professor Kaczynski from Stanford Graduate School of Business told me on this same show that privacy is a thing of the past. We are in a post-privacy era. And just from what we've talked about so far, there's certainly something to be said for that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think it depends on the threat. This is something security people talk about. They say, what is the security property? And privacy or confidentiality is one of them. And what is the threat? It's very hard to defend against all threats all the time. This is why security will be a job for our grandchildren. It will never be solved because you defend here and the attacker goes there. And you can't defend everywhere at once because you can't afford to, because some of the places look like they're not going to get attacked. So you just save some money by not defending there. Or you didn't know you needed to defend there. Like I said, the cookie was not meant to be used for tracking. But if enough people, especially the lead users I mentioned who adopt new browsers like Brave first, if they defend their data, that will make an economic difference because the trackers, the intermediaries, the ad tech companies need scale to make money. And if you hurt their scale business by taking enough of the valuable users, the advertising eyeballs that the advertisers most want to hit away, then you have leverage, then you have bargaining power. And I think that means you won't have perfect privacy. For instance, we won't defend you against nation state threats or low-level network threats like your ISP or maybe one of the big cable companies or mobile companies, or perhaps there's an edge cache provider that is doing something to track you a bit. And they only see part of you, but they could put a profile together. Those are risks that are harder to defend against, but they're also not the problem that we're trying to solve. And if you can't solve some of those problems, then you just have to live with them. The real problem to solve, I think, where we have leverage, if we get enough users, is the economics of tracking for advertising, which has created this technological apparatus that can be used not just for ads, but for troll campaigns and spyware and psychological warfare and ethnic cleansing and all sorts of horrible things.
I'm assuming you're an avid Brave user. What else do you do to secure your privacy?
There are other companies that are aligning on privacy and not burdened by the conflict of interest I mentioned Google has, where they have to be an ad business and a search business, really an ad business, across search and display ads on websites and so on, Play Store, apps, ads and apps. They have to reconcile that with representing the user, and it's a real conflict. We don't have that. Other companies don't have that are starting from a clean user-first, privacy by default position. So that's heartening.
Not to get disheartening after that, but one of the ways that you had talked about proving that I'm a real person is an issue, and one of the most popular ways to do that, of course, is with CAPTCHA, which is potentially a hole poked into the privacy you've set up for me, isn't it?
Yes, especially with Google's reCAPTCHA version 3, which is really based on tracking now. It's not so important to have them make you solve a puzzle and pass the Turing test. It's more that they have to put a script on every page, and they have to measure you behaviorally and then see if you look like a robot. And that is pretty invasive, and it's probably tied in accidentally or on purpose to their whole tracking business. So I have concerns, again, when a superpower like Google does something like reCAPTCHA version 3. I am an advisor, full disclosure, to a project called HCAPTCHA.com, the human CAPTCHA. And it's a drop-in replacement for reCAPTCHA, but it doesn't have that conflict because it's built on a fairly clean business of labeling images, which is something that was already performing for the company and is used for, noticing in a catalog or an image that there's a product that can be marketed and identified. That's a valuable service. It doesn't create a conflict that leads to tracking the user. And so HCAPTCHA.com, the human CAPTCHA token, tries to pay the publishers who embed it, and it does not, they promise, take your data and use it to sell or rent access for ad placement. So they're taking a different approach, and they're not burdened by that conflict of interest I mentioned. Now, there are things we're doing that are even cleaner, where, like I said, we study locally on device where all your data has to transit anyway. We block all the trackers, and we generate anonymous proofs of your identity. And that's an even stronger technique.
In a sense, I mean, we'd go back to the future that way, because the banks, for example, have been using behavioral AI as another check that yes, it's really me, and but it's contained, and it's okay as long as it's contained. And now
let's hope it's contained. You go to an airline site to book a flight, and it turns out their booking system is full of third parties, sometimes hostile or suspect third parties. So the banks, I think, do a better job. There's an arms race there. The ability of a machine learning algorithm to say this is a human can be countered by the fraudsters working harder to look like a human. So you have to play that game for the duration. And that's part of what we're trying to do with the local study that keeps your user score, your proof of humanity, on your device, and then puts a blind or zero knowledge proof out to our service or any service that needs it.
Okay, all right, cool. Brendan, what can't you believe I didn't ask you?
Well, I think the big question might be, does privacy matter to enough people for us to make money? And that's something that concerned me greatly too, because you look at a project that got to 100 million users like Firefox, or certainly Google with Chrome has hundreds of millions of active users. And it turns out it's all search-based. It's all revenue based on searching and ads for searching. And I wanted something different, but I've been advising companies that do advertising online, and I realized maybe 7 million valuable users was a threshold. If you hit that, then you can probably make enough money to cover your costs, because above a certain level, software has no marginal cost increase. You can make a zillion widgets or 1,000, doesn't matter, once you've sunk the cost to make a good widget. So I want to get to that point of 7 million active users, and if we do, I think we'll have a proven model, and then you'll see our SDK showing up elsewhere. You'll probably see standards that look like what we're doing or pieces of what we're doing. You'll see other browsers that can legitimately claim to be private by default using the same or similar techniques.
Okay, so lucky number 7. Do you have an over-under bet on when that would happen? 2023?
It might take a few more years, yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and your insight.
Well, thanks for having me. It was my pleasure again. Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us as well. Until next time, bye-bye.